There's a wasp reference in this episode. But if you have a phobia of wasps, I want you to know you don't need to worry. I don't want to preempt it, but it does make clear that the wasp we're talking about in this episode is fictional. So I don't want you to panic. It's not a real wasp. It can't hurt you. Real wasps can hurt you. If you were listening to a real wasp, that would be a reason to panic. Because a real wasp could come straight into my open mouth while I'm talking. And that's terrifying. I understand why you'd have a phobia of that. I know there was a wasp in here before. Many months ago I started a show with there's a wasp in here, and that was real. Don't worry, the one that's mentioned on here is entirely fictional, and I'm entirely in control of the fiction. There's no need for any harm to come to you from this wasp unless I tell a story that I decide involves it causing harm to you. And if that's the case, I don't know what you want me to do about that. I can't limit my imagination for you. You use your imagination to put up a mental barrier to think, any wasp that appears in this podcast can't hurt me. Even though I've got thoughts of wasps flying all over the place coming into my ears, it can't harm me because it's not real. You keep telling yourself that. And I'll keep telling myself that I've given you fair warning. And if the stuff about the wasp in here scares you, what's that thing they call it in wars when some harm accidentally gets done on the side? Collateral damage, that's what it is. So if you end up terrified of wasps, as you already are, you end up terrified by this podcast, that's collateral damage. Overall, I'm doing good. That's what you should tell yourself. Because you're doing damage to me as well. Your phobia of wasps is doing collateral damage to me before I've even got started. I'm worrying about what my wasp story is going to do to your psyche. And I'm here obsessing over it now. So you've done collateral damage to me by creating a society in which podcasters feel the need to start their show by warning you about their wasp fiction. So I hope you'll take that on board and think about what you've done there. Because for Christ's sake, it's hard enough to do this as it is. This is a difficult thing to do. I don't think you realise how hard it is. This is my 836th attempt to do a podcast. I've been trying to do a podcast since 2006. I even gave up for 7 years at one point and said it was all over. Then I came back last year and said I'm going to have another go at this because I'm a trier. So now this is my 836th attempt to make a podcast. This is my 836th pilot episode. I'm going to get it right one of these days, but it would help if I didn't have to stop and think about your fucking phobia. And I'm not swearing there, it's Phucking. It's alliteration, fucking phobia, because it sounds good. Maybe I'll use that as the title, will I? Or maybe not, because I'm trying to be considerate. This podcast gets put up on another site by Frank from the Overnightscape, who very kindly archives it. I don't want to be putting swear words up on his site. Not openly anyway. You can hide them in the episode. I don't want Frank to have to worry about, am I putting a swear word on my website? So you're off the hook for now, phobia listener. Maybe I'll call it flipping phobias. That's relatively tame. That could have double meaning. That could imply that I'm flipping your phobia by turning it upside down and turning it against you. That's probably what you'll think I'm doing anyway. Okay, so flipping phobias, take one, here we go. Into your head, into your head, into your head, into your head, into your head. Now I know what you're thinking there. You're thinking, oh Christ, I've just seen the date on this. It's the 1st of December or something. Don't worry. It's not going to be all about Christmas. I do mention the concept of Christmas, but it just so happens the first few minutes of that segment are shit. Let's pretend I've been talking about Christmas for the last few minutes, and now suddenly for some reason I'll mention the following thought. Her name was Mary. It was well published. It's in all the documentation for that belief system. They have it down that Jesus' mother's name was Mary. And you might think maybe her maiden name was Jesus. Well, why would her maiden name be Jesus? Well, I suppose you'll say, well, why wouldn't it? There's no reason it couldn't have been. Not against the law to have the same name that your son ends up having. especially when you don't know you're going to have a son. Because, of course, Mary didn't find out she was going to have a son until her cousin was sent over to her house, if I remember rightly, and told, "You're going to have God's son. You're expecting a child now." Well, you weren't expecting it until this moment, but you can expect a child and you're going to have a. The father is going to be God, and your husband is going to be a little uncomfortable at the prospect, but he'll come around eventually, he'll support it. And then you'll go off one day, about 2 days before Christmas. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, what in the name of Christ is Christmas? Well, that's an interesting way to ask it. What in the name of Christ is Christmas? The answer's in the question. Christ Mass. That's what it is. And of course, you'll say, Mass is spelled M-A-S-S. Christmas just has M-A-S. It's called Christmas. Maybe the people who want to abolish Christmas, but they don't want to stop saying the word Christmas, decided we can pretend it's named after Chris Christopherson or something. And of course, you'll say to that, you'll say, who in the name of Christ is Chris Christopherson? I think he was a singer. I think I might be confusing him with Christopher Cross. Oh, Christopher Cross! That would be better. We don't want to do this war on Christmas thing where everyone has to say the holidays instead of Christmas. So instead, we'll keep calling it Christmas, but we'll say it's named after Christopher Cross. You could have Christopher Cross season from Christmas to Good Friday, a season of about 3 months usually. It varies from year to year. Now, in case you don't know who Christopher Cross was, he was the fella who went, something, something when you're alone in New York City. The best that you can do. Now, of course, one of the Home Alone movies, wasn't it? Alone in New York or something? I think so. And that was a Christmas movie, I presume. Any Home Alone movie can be called a Christmas movie because that's when you watch family movies. People gather around the television and do Home Alone 1, and then Home Alone 2, and then Home Alone 4, and then Home Alone again naturally. That's the other fella. What's his name? The fella who did Alone Again Naturally. He had a name that was very similar to those people who used to write the musicals. Gilbert O'Sullivan, that's who he was. Gilbert O'Sullivan. He did something, 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 something alone again, naturally. Then I something, 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 something was a something, 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 alone again, naturally. Almost as depressing as a Roy Orbison song. Bleak and depressing, like one of those soaps where everyone's in the pub and they're always fighting, and it's the same people 4 nights a week at 7:30 p.m. for 30 years. You watch the same people having the same arguments and the same shit and going to the same pub and talking in the same accents. Fair City, for example, or EastEnders would be a prime example. Fair City is an Irish soap set in a fictional suburb of Dublin, and it's one of those ones where they all go to the pub every night. They all meet up in the pub and they have their arguments there, or they go out to the one shop that everyone goes to, and then they go, delete this bit about the theme song, that's irrelevant. I don't want anything irrelevant on this podcast. Anyway, suffice to say, this Gilbert O'Sullivan, I heard him on a podcast a few weeks ago, and he seemed like a reasonably positive fella. He actually sounded like a reasonably normal, acceptable human being. So why all this song sounds so fucking depressing, I don't know. Maybe there's something wrong with him. He didn't say whether there's anything wrong with him. He neither denied or admitted that there was anything wrong with him. Not that admitted is the right word for it. There's nothing wrong with having something wrong with you, but you should admit it so that the people who grew up on your music as teenagers who are very open to being influenced by these singers, they need to know if they're hearing a bleak song like Alone Again Naturally, or for example that Radiohead song Creep. If you're a teenager listening to that, there needs to be a note on the sleeve signed by the artist saying, please note, I'm not actually like this in real life and life isn't this bleak. This is a fictional song. So don't go thinking this is how you should live your life as a teenager. No, live a happy life and just listen to bleak music like this just as a work of fiction. And then you go, signed Radiohead. Put that at the bottom of every Gilbert O'Sullivan song and every Radiohead album. Signed Radiohead, don't take this too seriously. Because I remember as a teenager, I took Radiohead quite seriously. I said, the world must be a very bleak place. And listen to OK Computer. They did songs about the karma police. And then they did songs about some robot voice going fitter, happier, more productive, or something about living in an asylum. But then, years and years and years later, you hear an interview with the Radiohead people and they're normal, well-balanced men. And why didn't they tell me that when I was a teenager? I could have done with knowing that. Just say, listen to this Radiohead album, but don't take it as a documentary. Everybody's fine outside of the world of the stuff that comes into your ears through these things on your head. Everything outside of there is the real world. Everything inside of there, between your ears, while you're connected to your music device, is fiction. Just a mental exercise, that's all it is. Put that on the record, Steve, or whatever the modern day equivalent of. Same with Gilbert O'Sullivan. Same with Roy Orbison. Now, obviously, his son would have to sign that on behalf of his estate. Because it turned out Roy Orbison didn't just sing songs that were bleak. He actually lived the bleak life. Half of his family were wiped out in fires and tragedies, and everyone ended up dead, and then he ended up dead very young. So at least he put his money where his mouth was, or he put his mouth where his money was. He had bleak stuff to sing about in the end. Roy Orbison was in the supergroup called the Travelling Wilburys for their first album anyway. He died. They made a video of them all sitting on a train. And when it gets to the verse that Roy Orbison sings, they just show an empty rocking chair moving as if he's in it but invisible, like it's a ghost singing or something. Why in the name of Christ would you have a rocking chair on a train, was the first thing I thought. Then I realised for some reason, I think they're in a goods carriage. So I suppose someone might be transporting a rocking chair. That's very dangerous. At least put some blocks under it. There was rocking when there wasn't even any weight in it, just Roy Orbison's ghost. Because he died after they recorded the song, but before they made the video. Suppose in a way, it's not meant to be taken too seriously. Okay, we won't take it too seriously then. Does that mean Roy Orbison's not actually dead? Because I'm pretty sure he is. Because he hasn't had another comeback since that. And if there's one thing we know about Roy Orbison is he has a comeback every 20 or 30 years. He hasn't had another one since that, and that was in the 80s or 90s. So I think he's probably dead. And may he rest in peace. I know what you're thinking there. You're thinking he's mentioned Roy Orbison, Chris Christopherson, Christopher Cross, Gilbert O'Sullivan. Who else? Radiohead. Is this the Hit Parade program? Is he going to do a rundown of this week's Hit Parade charts? Coming in at number 2 is Roy Orbison. Except, of course, this is 2024, so the only way Roy Orbison is going to be in the charts is if there's some child who's figured out how to use a keyboard. Think someone going... Only the lonely... Only the lonely. I remember in the 1990s there was this father and son under the name Jive Bunny and the Master Mixers. And they're doing medleys of 1950s dance hall songs like Glenn Miller or Eddie Cochran's Come On Eddie Cochran. For you young people, he was this fella in the 1960s. Like Elvis Presley, except he went for about a year and then dropped dead from a car crash. I know that sounds a bit off. How do you drop dead from a car crash? Well, if you happen to have a sunroof and you're the fella who's excitedly standing up with your head out the window, so I suppose, wait, no, he couldn't drop dead. Maybe if the car got knocked over by a tree or something. No, I take that back. That wouldn't be dropping dead. No, there's probably no real way you can drop dead in a car. Unless, I suppose, you're in a horse box that's being towed behind the car. In which case, you'd most likely be a horse, but you might be, if you're transporting a sick horse, you might put a human in with the horse, in the horse box being towed behind the car, and you'd be standing there tending to the horse, and you might just drop dead of natural causes. It could have been like, spoiler alert for Kill Bill Volume 2. She finds Bill, and she does the Grand Master thing where you punch him in a certain way, and then the next time he takes 5 steps, he drops dead. So maybe it was like that. Maybe the horse did that to him. Not to Eddie Cochran, because as far as I'm aware, there was no horse box involved in the Eddie Cochran car crash. But no, in my fictional, hypothetical thing about dropping dead in a horse box while being transported, and still that wouldn't be a car crash. It wouldn't, unless you could drop dead in the horse box that's being towed, and then that terrifies the horse, so the horse lets out a big neighing sound, whatever you call it, and whoever's driving the car gets a fright. He thinks, oh Christ, what's he done to the horse? And gets distracted and crashes. But you wouldn't have dropped dead of a car crash then. You'd have dropped dead just before the car crash. So there's that. Once upon a time, there was a dog. A dog. A dog. A dog. A dog. A dog. That was an experiment. The past few months I've been regularly doing a segment that starts with once upon a time there was a dog. A dog. A dog. Basically a dog. And then I carry on and see where it leads me. I thought I'd try something different today. I thought I'd go, once upon a time there was a dog. A dog. A dog. A dog. A dog. A dog. And this dog is walking along the street one day, minding his own business, rather uninspired as it happens, just thinking, what is there for me in this life? Like, I hope every morning I hear someone going, dog, hey dog, here, have some breakfast. And of course they give me the breakfast and it turns out it's just dog food in a bowl. Exact same thing they give me when they call it supper, or when they call it dinner, or when they call it lunch. They like to humanise it by calling it breakfast, or dinner, or lunch, but it's still just dog food in a bowl. Not that there's anything wrong with that. There are dogs in Africa who would kill for a bowl of dog food like what I'm getting. But they don't deserve it if they do that. Those are would-be murderers. They don't deserve that. Although I suppose we don't want to have thought police, surely. But if they're living somewhere abroad where there's a lawless society, a dog is probably just having to going. Actually, now that you mention it, if a dog eats a human being, that's not cannibalism. So it should be less shocking. But it's not really. It's not. And dogs shouldn't eat human beings unless they're being served one voluntarily. If you're giving your dog some sort of dog food that's made from human beings, make sure it's traceable, like you would with any beast that you feed your family. And people buy beef now in the supermarket. It can even be tracked, I understand, right down to the national herd number of whatever farm the beef came from. It's traceable. So the same should be done with human meat that you feed to a dog in a country where that's considered acceptable. It should be traceable so you can make sure that it's not being fed the victim of a murder or an involuntary death by someone who hadn't agreed to be fed to a starving dog. Now, I know what you're thinking there. You're thinking, that sounds horrific. Well, I know, it sounds horrific. It sounds absolutely appalling. That's why I'm trying to find ways to make it slightly less horrific. Trying to improve the lot of these dogs in other countries and their humans who are apparently being eaten by them. I'm trying to make it a bit better by bringing in some sort of structure, same as we did with the cows here. That's what we did with the cows here. I used to work in the Department of Agriculture. I used to spend half my day looking at herd numbers of cows, and then each cow would have a tag number as well. So you'd see this tag number, you'd see ACMU WC61754Z, and you think, oh, I wonder what that cow is thinking right now. I wonder, does he know that there's someone up in a big head office in the middle of the city thinking about him right now? It'd probably do him a world of good to know that he is. Oh wait, or is it a she? Are cows all female? I'm not sure. Of course, if you ask something like that in the modern office, people quite rightly take offence and say, wait a minute, are you talking about your co-workers? And you'll say no, but then they'll say, then why are you saying it like that? Co-workers, C-O-W, workers. And you'll say, I'm not saying it like that. In fact, the only person who'd said us like that is the guy who draws Dilbert, and we all know what happened to him, so we don't quote him on stuff like that. But he used to put co-workers, but he'd spell it cow workers, kind of, and kind of vaguely hint that he was calling his colleagues cows. But if you're working in a place where you actually are working with cows, not humans who you think of as cows, but actual cows, then you probably have more respect for them than that. Well, you would imagine so. In my job in the Department of Agriculture, we used to call them animals, or we'd call them cows, or we'd call them, whatever else you call them, cattle, livestock. Of course, there'd be deadstock as well. I never heard the phrase deadstock used, which is quite surprising since almost every cow whose number went through my spreadsheet there ended up at some point deadstock. We've a lot to get on with today. Items that need to be attended to. Issues that need to be addressed. Topics. Oh, topics. We've got topics coming out of my right forefinger. Oh no, wait, it's my right little finger. What's that called? Is it called the index finger? I don't know which finger is which on human anatomy, even my own. I know what the big one is called the forefinger. I know this one's called the thumb. And I know there's one that's called the index finger, but I'm not sure I know which one it is. Is that the little finger or the one you put a ring on? That's called a ring finger. Then your second finger, what's that called? Surely to Christ, that's not your index finger. An index finger surely should be your forefinger. That's the one. In the old days when we looked things up in dictionaries and telephone directories, you'd put your finger on the page and swipe down the page to see all the names and numbers till you get to the one that you want. So presumably the index finger would be the forefinger. That's what he would use to look through an index of any kind. I'm not going to look her up just now, because it doesn't matter. We are an advanced species. We shouldn't be limiting ourselves by assigning different functions and identities and roles to each finger. We should be advancing past that now and having humans who can do the same thing with any of their fingers. Their fingers should be all interchangeable. Anything that you can do with your forefinger, you should be able to do with your index finger or your little finger or your thumb. Now, I haven't been to school in about 30 years. Last time I went, they were still trying to get everyone to write with one hand. Nobody was doing the ambidextrous thing. They wouldn't say, today we're going to practice with our left hands and tomorrow we're going to practice with our right hands. You don't want you getting too attached to either of your hands. That would have been a sensible way to do it. But I bet you if you looked up your old classmates or if you had a reunion, anyone who went to school in the same era as me, you'll find there about 5% of your classmates are unable to write because something's happened to the one hand that they were trained to write with. And it's even possible in some cases that the reason they can't use that hand anymore is because it's being worn out from repetitive strain from writing with one hand. Touch typing, you use both hands. That's no use if one of your hands wears out. You can only type half of the keyboard, or you have to train yourself to do it better. But no, if you've learned to write with one or the other independently, maybe your handwriting will look slightly different in different hands. Maybe you could have one signature for your job that you use on a professional basis when you're signing on behalf of your employer. And you'd have another signature that's for signing in a personal capacity. So you'd have one hand for each. And of course, you still have the problem. If you lose a hand, you're going to have to use the same handwriting both at work and at home. Well, you get over that. Better than having no hands at all. I presume it is anyway. I've never had no hands, nor do I want to have no hands. I presume having a hand is better than having no hands. Stands to reason, doesn't it? If a dog came along here now and said, I'm going to bite your hand off, or else I'm going to go out there and piss all over the carpet. Well, I'd say that's fine. There's no carpet out there. Out there is the hall. It's not carpeted. Beyond that is the kitchen. That's sure as hell not carpeted. Now, the sitting room beyond that is carpeted, but it's not a carpet I'm particularly attached to. I'll be going to replace it eventually. You can piss wherever you want. I prefer if you use the litter tray though. We do have litter trays around the house. Now they're designed for cats, but you're a dog and you're in my house. You don't live here. So beggars can't be choosers. Of course the dog will say to that, I'm not a beggar, I'm a burglar. I've broken into your house. Surely you don't expect me to abide by the rules of toilet use that you assign to your cats who live here. I don't live here. I'll piss and shit wherever I want. I'm literally a burglar dog who's broken into your house. I'm wearing a prison uniform. Surely you must have noticed that. Of course I haven't noticed that, because a dog prison uniform is just a collar. It's nothing really else, just a collar, and when they're moving them from cell to cell, they maybe attach a lead to the collar, but that's about it. There's no such thing as a dog prison uniform. There's a wasp in here. Now, I've started an episode a few months ago where I went, there's a wasp in here. That situation, there was actually a wasp in here. I was doing a reality show, basically. This time, there isn't actually a wasp in here. I'm doing comedy fiction. I'll have a go at comedy fiction. There's a whole section in the podcast directories. You have to pick a subcategory now. You have to pick comedy interviews or stand-up or some other thing, improv. And I don't like being under improv, and I don't like being under stand-up, but you have to put it somewhere. I do notice that there's another section under fiction that's not under comedy. You go under fiction and there's a subcategory called comedy fiction. So if I could do that, I could have a fictional wasp in here instead of a real one. Then I can put this in the fiction subcategory called comedy fiction. And that would be a new string to my elbow, wouldn't it? A new string to my... Oh no, string to your bow. It's string to your bow. That's what they say. I don't really understand that. My father used to play the fiddle. I don't remember him even aspiring to having an extra string on his bow. I presume they came as standard with a straight number. Oh, now that I think about it, they're not talking about the strings on the violin that stretch out over the hole. They remain the same. They're talking about the strings on the bow. And now that I think about it, if you ever handled the bow of a violin, it's got what seems to be hundreds of tiny threads. So I suppose maybe there's an advantage to having finer strings on the bow, in which case you'd need more of them. I don't know, but apparently having another string to your bow is considered a good thing. So I'm going to try and have another string to my bow by having a fictional wasp in here. So there's a wasp in here. There's a wasp in here. It's currently on the windowsill behind me. Now I can't see it from here. I'm not going to turn around and look, because for one thing it's fictional, and for another thing, if I go over to the window it'll have flown away. Despite being fictional, and despite the fact that I have control over everything this wasp does, if I go over there I'll disturb it and it'll fly away. It'll have to, because otherwise my fiction will be unbelievable, won't be credible. I have to make it somewhat realistic. Just like what Stephen King does this all the time. He says, I have to make it realistic. It's about this author. He writes horror books and he's in a car crash. And by car crash, I don't mean the latest televised mini-series based on one of his books was a car crash. No, he's literally in a car crash. And then he gets picked up by some scary woman. She picks him up and brings him round and locks him up in the bedroom and says, you're going to get better here. Recover from your car crash here, and then going to make you write something. And that's supposed to be horror. A horror writer who spends thousands and thousands and thousands of hours writing horror stories that go on for thousands of pages. And we're supposed to believe that for him, the idea of being forced to write more is horror. No, he clearly likes writing. That's not a punishment at all. That's not horror. But he wrote this book where he made out that any woman who's a fan of a horror author like himself and who kidnaps him and brings him home and forces him to write more is somehow being unkind. No. Stephen King has spent a lot of his life trying to find ways to write more. The publisher used to say, 1 a year and no more, you're writing too much. So he'd go and put them out under a pseudonym. So he would be delighted if some woman kidnapped him and forced him to write more. Then he could go to the publisher and say, I know I'm not allowed to write more than 1 book a year, but I was literally forced. Are you going to deny a victim his voice just because it went beyond the contract? Because if you do, I'll write a non-fictional story about you, my publisher, then. That's what I'll do. As it happens, Stephen King did write a non-fiction book about writing. He said, this is a real book, it's about writing, because I write in real life. Half of my books are about writers, but those are all fictional, but now I'm writing a real one about me. I've read this book a couple of times. I read the audiobook version the last time. And he goes, hello, I wrote stuff. What I like to do is sit down in front of a table with my back to the window. Now, first thing I do before I settle down is check if there's any wasps or insects or cats in the room. If there are, I open the main window and then I open the side window of the ensuite bathroom, and hopefully there'll be an air current going through that will blow out any insects or cats that are in the room. And then I sharpen my pencil. I don't know if young people use pencils or pencil sharpeners anymore, but there was a thing called a pencil sharpener. You put the end of your pencil in it, and then you'd rotate the pencil, and then the blade would kind of trim it, make it sharper, because you want it sharp. You're writing these books about stabbing people. You want to have a sharp pencil. He uses a fucking typewriter. He doesn't use the pencil at all. Maybe sometimes if he has a bit of arthritis in his hand, he prods away at the keys with the pencil. But that doesn't count as writing with a pencil. It doesn't. That counts as using the pencil as a wand, not a magic wand. Just a wand that hits some buttons. In fact, a wand that creates even fewer letters probably than a normal traditional pencil would. Wait a minute. If you're typing with a pencil, let's say you've got two pencils and you're writing with both hands, but you're using it on a typewriter. Maybe your fingers aren't working great, but you're able to hold a pencil in each hand, so you use them to hit the buttons on the keyboard. So you tap away, one pencil in one hand and one pencil in the other hand. When people learn to touch type, each of their fingers gets to know a particular letter or key that it's responsible for, usually 2 or 3 different keys. The fingers get to know where they're going. Now, in the case of tapping these keys with a pencil, the pencil in your left hand would be responsible for approximately half of the alphabet and approximately half of the symbols and other keys and numbers. And the pencil in the other hand would be responsible for the others. There would be some duplication of responsibilities here because there's the space bar. Either of the pencils could do that. So, using a pencil like that, ironically enough, each pencil is using half as many letters as it could normally do if you were using it to write, but they're a lot more legible, there's that. And then, of course, you don't print it because it's a typewriter. It comes out printed straight away the minute you type it. You press a button, and then whatever's on the button, a 7 or a J or a semicolon or a space, immediately appears on the page. The only exception, of course, is the space bar. When you press the space bar, it doesn't type a space, it leaves a space. And that's handy, because if you accidentally press the space key on a typewriter, that's the one occasion when you don't have to get out the Tipp-Ex or the whiteout and delete it. You just move the slider back to the left a bit and just type whatever you were going to put there instead. You kind of enjoy that moment. You wouldn't normally enjoy it in real life. Usually in real life, if you were going along one day just doing your job, you press the space bar, you wouldn't go, oh, this is great, I get to not have to delete anything. No, but if it was in the middle of a day when you're doing a lot of deleting, then somewhat of a relief. But I would still argue that using a computer would be better. Even using the pencil to write with would be better than that. That's another reason why it might be good to be ambidextrous and use a pencil or a pen in each hand. You could probably have a whole new signature that you write using both hands. It probably wouldn't be joined up writing. You'd assign half of the alphabet to the pencil in your left hand and half of the alphabet to the pencil in your right hand, and you just write onto the page like that. Yeah, it would be difficult to join them up. Get good at that, you can get good at anything. You end up being a calligraphist. What's that what they're called? The people who do calligraphy. There's a museum in Dublin where you go in, you see this thing called a Book of Kells. It's an ancient handwritten book. It's written tens of millions of years ago by the Celts or the Vikings or whoever the hell it was. The ancient inhabitants of these lands. And they wrote stuff down in very fancy writing. They call it calligraphy. People would become monks and they dedicate their whole lives to writing one paragraph of a book like that. They say, oh, this is great. So I've spent my life doing this, but I know that millennia from now, people will be reading this. And that's somewhat true. People go in to see the Book of Kells. Someone comes in every morning wearing gloves and turns the page, so you can view one page a day behind glass or something. And they say, oh, don't touch that, don't touch that, don't put your modern greedy hands on that book. It'll fall apart. It's managed to survive for thousands of years, where apparently if you touch it for the express purpose of turning a page so you can read the thing, apparently it'll fall apart. I presume there's digitised versions of the Book of Kells that you can read where you can see every page. But if anyone who did that had a bit of an imagination, they'd design an app that shows you the Book of Kells but only lets you view one page a day. You don't want to be encouraging people to be binging on everything. They already binge on Netflix and they binge on television and they binge on food. You don't want people binging on books like that. Don't encourage binging. Binging is bad. I binge on podcasts all the time. I find a new podcast and I listen to this whole back catalogue of 8 million episodes, and then I run out and I think, Christ, I've nothing else to listen to. So then I have to go and listen to something else. That's the problem with binging. You have to find something else to listen to after that. And you find, I'm addicted to listening to that thing that I've been binging on. Oh, I didn't see that coming. Oh, you binged on something for 8 years and then suddenly you find you're addicted. Oh gosh, what a surprise. Yes, I know. No need to be sarcastic about it. Anyway, live and learn. Live and learn. Is that what they say? They say live and learn. You could just live and not learn. You're going to just drop dead if you stop learning. No, you're not. I think the last thing I learned was in late 2003. I went on a night course in web development and learned how to make the website to put this podcast on. That was the last thing I learned. And it's done me well. It's been 20 years of making a website that looks like it was made in 1974. And that served me well. You don't need a website for a podcast anyway. It's a podcast. It's like saying you need a newspaper for an orchestra. You don't. It's an orchestra. You listen to an orchestra. Maybe you look at them when you go and see them live. But who goes to see orchestras playing live? They don't. People don't say, oh, look, my favourite orchestra is doing a tour. I wonder, is it the original lineup? The original lineup had 84 different musicians in it, so it's very unlikely that they'd all still be there. That's the problem with an orchestra. It has turnover. Do you think your favourite band that has 4 or 5 people in it has a high turnover? Because the drummer died in 1982 and the fellow who plays rhythm guitar retired, or they had a row and they broke up. Wait till you see what happens when you have an orchestra that's been going for 30 years. You'll have at least 30 people being swapped out. If you go to see your favourite orchestra on tour, there's a good chance you'll be disappointed because it's going to be different from what you see on their 1973 bootleg Live in Rio album. Well, still, you're probably used to that. If you're into orchestral music, you're probably used to that, so it probably doesn't bother you too much. It's just a bit weird for you to be a fan of an orchestra that's probably not the same. There is a choir I heard of recently that's been going for 100 years. There's some woman who's been in it for about 90, but everyone else died and had to be replaced. Now, I suspect most of the people leave before they die. They retire at some point. I hope so, because it would be rather depressing to be in a venture like that, in a choir that's been going for 100 years. And every time someone dies who was in the original lineup, they have to replace them. And you have a funeral every second week. That would be quite depressing. Also quite scary if you're one of the original members. You're 90 and you're in this choir. And all of your bandmates in the choir are dropping like flies. And probably being replaced by youngsters who are going to bring it in a whole new musical direction. They're just waiting for you to drop. You'd probably retire before you get to that point. Or maybe you start your own choir. You're a man out of the Rolling Stones, and one of them leave and then start his own kind of blues or jazz band or something, and he does his own shit now, so he doesn't have to deal with the youngsters like Jagger and the other fella going around doing their prancing about on stage. He said, I'm too old for this shit, I'm going to do blues now. Is that what he did? Was it Bill something or other? I don't know the exact details. Well, that's what you do if you're in the choir. That's what I would do anyway. Maybe you would do it differently. Maybe you have done it differently. Maybe you're literally in a choir. It's just occurred to me, there may well be people listening to this who are literally in the choir. And you're probably thinking, that's not how a choir works at all. He's a fucking moron. He's a moron. He knows nothing about choirs. He's guessing how they work. And that's fine. It's okay to guess how it works. But he's not very good at guessing. So it's turning out absolute drivel. He's talking nonsense. I'm going to have to correct him by making a proper podcast about choirs. Will you go ahead and do that? I'll even put out a link to it when you get it going. Go to intoyourhead.ie/contact. And you can tell me you've made a podcast about choirs to counteract the facts provided in this segment. The rest of the show is not going to mention choirs at all. It's going to be some mentions of Radiohead and Roy Orbison. Nothing about choirs from this point onward. You're going to start a whole new podcast series just to counteract the effects of me thinking wrongly about choirs for 8 minutes. That seems a little bit petty, but that's the internet. You're free to do as you want. I'm glad you had the freedom to do that. I'll take the high road and I'll offer to link to your new podcast series about choirs in the show notes of this episode in the future when you do it. I can't say fairer than that.
Into your head.
Now I know what you're thinking there. You're thinking, wait a minute. That's about the third time he's giving us a partial map of the layout of his home in about the last 6 months. What's all that about? Well, it's not about anything. It's just where the topic happens to lead. When I think about what's beyond the door that I'm sitting in front of right now, well, there's 2 doors in front of me to be exact. There's one over to the left a bit. That goes into a toilet. But the other one that's over there, I happen to know what's beyond that door, so I use that to lead me somewhere. And in the real world, if I went through that door, it would lead me out to a hole that's out there and then into a kitchen and then into a carpeted sitting room. So that's what sprang to mind when I said that. You probably think it's some big conspiracy for me to put out maps of my home with a view to, I don't know what you think I'm trying to do. I'm trying to stir up interest in someone buying it. No, it's not for sale. Not for sale. I'm going to live in this house until I drop dead. So no, there's no conspiracy when I happen to talk about the layout of my home. I'm in basically a cell here, voluntarily, but I'm thinking about the outside world. I'm not facing a window. I think that's the problem here. For the past year or so, since I brought this podcast back after its 7-year retirement, I used to always sit at an upstairs window, a view over the estate outside. I don't mean the estate of the type you find in Downton Abbey. No, just an estate, a housing estate. And there were views over what I used to call a Pat Interstate Highway wall. And then there was views into the next estate and views along a green and stuff. For the past year, I've been basically looking at a wall with 2 doors on it. Now, I think if you assess it fairly, you'll find that's probably stimulated my imagination. Having a place where I'm not looking out a window. So I have to look in through the windows of my brain and into my imagination and into my third eye or whatever is activated by these energy drinks. So I think it's benefited overall. Now that I think about it. I'm overthinking it now so nothing's coming out. That's going to be a problem. This is the closing segment to today's episode of Into Your Head podcast. Goodbye. Now don't stop yet. Well, I know it's probably automated. You probably have a playlist set up and you're probably very annoyed now because you're listening in your car and you've heard me telling you that this is the closing segment. But I've refused to end the episode so that it straight away goes automatically onto your next podcast that you have lined up. There's probably something better. Well, no, it's not going to end yet. And the only way you're going to end it right now is if you illegally take your hands off the steering wheel and fiddle with your phone or your device that you're playing this on. Don't do that. Don't crash and die just because you're not enjoying the length of this podcast. all things must pass. This podcast will end probably quite shortly. I know, have some patience. Have some patience and don't overtake that car either. You don't know what's coming around that corner. You're going to kill someone and they're going to kill you. One of you will kill both of you, or you'll both equally kill each other, and everyone will be thinking for the rest of their lives that you're both killers. No, don't do that. Have a bit of patience. You hate your job anyway. Why are you in such a hurry to get there? You're probably saying to that, you're saying, I'm on my way home, you fucking idiot. And I'll say, well then, why are you in such a hurry to get home? You obviously hate your home. You go out to work all day. Every hour God sends, every hour of daylight, you spend the best hours of the best years of your life in an office somewhere. Why are you in such a hurry to get home? You clearly love the office. Maybe you don't work in an office. Maybe you go to an office but you don't work. I suppose that's why you enjoy it so much. Then why do you enjoy getting home? When you get home, you have to prepare food in a manner that doesn't poison your family, at least not in an obvious way. You need to do it more discreetly. You need to accidentally use chicken that you ran under a tap because you didn't know that you're not supposed to wash raw chicken under the tap. Because that would be a reasonable thing to do. If you accidentally poisoned your family by washing chicken, it would be reasonable to say to a judge, maybe not in my country, in your country where you have a rather incompetent legal structure, a judge would accept if he say, oh, judge, it was all in good faith. I ran the raw chicken under the tap to wash it because I thought that seemed like the common sense thing to do. You wash raw chicken. Because raw chicken is very dangerous, so I washed it. Nobody really knows that you're not supposed to wash raw chicken. The experts say apparently that makes it more dangerous. So the fact that you killed your whole family doing it has hereby ruled misadventure. It must be great for you to live in a country where you can do that. Over here, if you did something like that, you'd be quite rightly put in jail for the rest of your life. We say no. Everyone knows about food safety here. We have adverts on the television and the radio. You listen to a podcast from Australia in Ireland and you hear Irish government ads in the middle of it telling you the correct way to deal with chicken. So no, you couldn't use that over here. But you probably could get away with it. Well, please don't. Please don't. Or else don't listen to my podcast if you're going to do that. Now, I know it's a bit late for this episode because this episode is nearly over. And to your credit, you want this to be over as we established. You're waiting for this to be over so you can go on to the next thing in your playlist. So I can't ask for more than that. I ask you to stop listening to my podcast when it eventually gets to the end of the episode. So I suppose that's reasonable.